Joining me now from Washington to look at the latest in NAFTA, tariffs, and what it might all mean is Duncan Wood. He is the director of the Mexico Institute at the Wilson Center. He's a specialist in NAFTA and U.S., Canada, and Mexico relations. Professor Wood, thanks very much for taking the time.
Great pleasure. Fun times here in Washington, as always.
Well, this is it. And we're being told that this came as quite a surprise with the tweet from the president. What should we make of this 5%, of this threat of 5% tariffs starting on June the 10th? What do we make of it?
Well, where to begin? I mean, let's begin with where we've just come from. I mean, we've just got over the trauma of the Section 232 tariffs on steel and aluminum, a negotiated end to that whole debacle. And, Mexico has been working with the United States to try to stop Central American migration, deploying, high levels of Mexican resources down onto its southern border and throughout its territory, trying to identify Central Americans who are making their way towards the U.S. border. And then President Trump, as is his wont, has come forward and said that Mexico just isn't doing enough, and in that case is going to get punished. Now, I mean, increasingly, the poor Mexicans, and I have to say that in this case, the poor Mexicans must be thinking, what is it we actually have to do to satisfy President Trump? And let me give you a little bit of context here. Mexico is going through a period of fiscal conservatism. In fact, they call it Republican austerity. The president there, López Obrador, has pledged to maintain a balanced budget. He's cutting a huge number of programs. And at this time, there is just no excess fat to cut that could be moved into the question of deporting more Central Americans from Mexico. And so the Mexicans, who are doing pretty much everything that they can to try to assist the United States, are now in a very, very difficult spot. And it makes us wonder, I have to say, it makes us wonder, what is it that President Trump is actually trying to achieve here? Because his advisors will have told him that the Mexicans can actually do very little to add to their efforts that already are in place.
And of course, the question we have here is, we've just heard from our foreign minister, Chrystia Freeland, and you know her very well because she spent much time down in Washington negotiating the NAFTA agreement. We've just heard from her that she is considering, and Canada is considering this a bilateral issue between the United States and Mexico. And we also saw that the Mexican president, you mentioned him, López Obrador, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, has basically just sent an envoy, but he's saying he doesn't want this to derail the process of ratifying NAFTA. But that is a million-dollar question. Where does this leave NAFTA?
So, I mean, I think, first of all, that Minister Freeland is absolutely right on that. This is a bilateral affair between Mexico and the United States. And it's the solution to the problem has to be negotiated bilaterally. The Mexican president is wise in trying to de-escalate the problem. But I fear that there will be a quite vociferous response from his own party. The Morena party, which dominates both chambers of the Mexican Congress, holding a more than two-thirds majority alongside its allies in the Chamber of Deputies and nearly two-thirds in the Senate, is a collection of various different political forces that have come together. And there have already been signals and voices from within the Morena party that say they're not particularly happy with the new USMCA, or as they call it in Mexico, the TMEC, and that they'd like to see some improvement in it. President López Obrador is committed to getting this thing ratified in the Mexican Congress, but I wonder if his party is going to continue to go along with him when it seems as though the United States just keeps insulting Mexico, threatening Mexico, without actually offering anything in return. A piece I wrote a couple of weeks ago, I said that the Mexicans are learning that if you give Trump an inch, he'll take a mile. But it seems as though President López Obrador has not learned that yet.
So I guess the question is, does this then represent a real, because as you say, he's downplaying it. He's saying we will continue on with the ratification of NAFTA in the Mexican Senate. But does this constitute a real threat for the whole procedure in Mexico?
I think in Mexico, yes, it poses a threat. I still think that the Mexicans overall are committed to getting this done. But increasingly, they're going to be hearing voices from the United States, in particular from the Democratic Party, telling them that it's very unlikely that this will get ratified in the United States this year. If it doesn't get ratified this year, then we're probably looking at 2021, because it's unlikely to be ratified in an election year in 2020. In which case, where's the rush? Why should we continue to, push through with this? Now, López Obrador's argument is this. He wants to get this all wrapped up. He doesn't believe that this was his treaty. He doesn't believe that this is something that he will benefit from personally during his time in office. So let's just get it wrapped up and let's move on to the next thing.
Okay,
his other main argument is just that he wants to focus on domestic politics. He does not want to be distracted by foreign conflicts, particularly with President Trump, in particular a conflict that he knows he cannot win. So he wants to get this out of the way. And the question is, will his party continue to go along with him?
Okay, so you've just opened the door to the question that all Canadians have, and that's the one that we're debating up here. And as you know, our Parliament has just tabled ratification legislation, and the question is, and you just alluded to it, if the reports suggest, and this is my question to you, you're just suggesting that the reports are that this might not pass the American Congress for 9 months or even until after the next American election. If that's the case, what should Canada be doing? Should Canada be in a rush to ratify it? It's exactly the same debate you're just describing in the Mexican Congress.
I mean, it all depends upon the political dynamics facing Prime Minister Trudeau at home, doesn't it? I mean, does he want to get this wrapped up and sort of tabled away before the election this year? Or is he quite happy to let this linger on if the Americans aren't willing to move on it? Because let's face it, having the agreement ratified in the Canadian Parliament does not mean that you can say this is a done deal. The major conflict over this agreement is right here in Washington. And as long as Speaker Pelosi and President Trump are embroiled in what is increasingly a personal or personalized conflict, then I think it's very unlikely that we're going to see this happen. So I wouldn't, if I was in charge of the Canadian Parliament, I wouldn't be pushing this at this point in time. I think that there's probably going to be many, many months ahead, if not years, before we see a ratification here in Washington.
And that is the question. When we were watching just 24 hours ago, Vice President Mike Pence here in Ottawa standing on a podium beside the Prime Minister saying we will have ratification by this summer.
I mean, you have to kind of feel for the Vice President now, is that, he's out there doing his part. He's been told to go and be an ambassador for the agreement. And then the President starts tweeting and in his classic disruptor style, basically starts breaking eggs. And he may say it's to make an omelet, but that omelet is a long way from being cooked.
If you had to make a bet, when would you say that this is going to pass Congress? I mean, I know it's everything's so unstable down there, but before the next election, the U.S. election?
If I had $1,000 to bet on this, I would say that 2021 is the earliest that this treaty will be ratified here in the United States. Okay, I don't see any political reason why the Democrats, and in particular Speaker Pelosi, would actually go ahead and push this through.
Okay, we will keep that tape and we will hold you to it. No, I want to thank you very much. Very interesting times. Thanks very much for speaking with us.
Thanks for having me.